Hi everyone, thank you for joining us for our Wednesday encouragement. And happy Hanukkah. Why am I wishing you a happy Hanukkah? Well, I'll tell you in just a minute. But really quickly, let me remind you about a couple of things coming up at Cherry Avenue. This Saturday at noon, the Thelma Carter Circle will be having their Christmas get-together at Mickey Tavern. And ladies, if you would like to go and haven't signed up yet, just call or email the office no later than today, and we'll try to add you to the list. And make plans to join us for our Candlelight service. It's going to be Sunday, December 19th at 6:30 p.m. This is always a special time when we kick off Christmas week with a wonderful time of fellowship and worship. And I hope you'll make certain to be here December 19th at 6:30. Well, today is the first day of December and we've started the Christmas season. But this week is also Hanukkah. And if you've never heard the story behind Hanukkah and why they light the 8 candles of the menorah, it's not only an interesting story, but it provides us with some inspiration for living in this world today. The Greeks under Alexander the Great had conquered the Persians. They were the ones who had allowed the Jews to return to Israel following their exile in Babylon. Alexander was favorable to the Jews, and in fact, when Alexander sided with them over the Samaritans, as a sign of appreciation, every Jewish male that year was named Alexander. Can you imagine how confusing that would be? Well, what started and then continued after Alexander's unexpected death was an effort by the Greeks to assimilate the Jews into their culture so that Jewish faith and culture would basically be absorbed and die out as a distinct faith. The Greeks had the Torah translated into Greek, which we call the Septuagint. And that was as a way to keep the Jewish people reading and learning in Greek instead of Hebrew. After Alexander's death, there was a civil war basically within the Greek dynasty, and they were struggling for power, and the scrimmage line was in Israel. And one of the sides, the Seleucids, decided that they weren't winning because their gods were unhappy. The Jews weren't accepting Greek culture like they should. So with the help of Jewish collaborators, they instituted laws that made practicing Judaism illegal, including studying the Torah, and they built the Ark, a citadel overlooking the temple, so that the Jews always knew they were watching them. They put a statue of Zeus in the temple, and they instituted the practice that every Jewish girl getting married, before being with her husband on her wedding day, had to first be with a local Greek official. Well, a large number of Jews adopted Greek practices and lifestyles, but those who were committed to their faith went into hiding in the hills. And they secretly studied the Torah and kept the practices of their faith alive. And one of the families, the Hasmoneans, who became known as the Maccabees, led this remnant of faithful Jews to rebel and try to reestablish their ability to practice their faith. There are different stories regarding what actually sparked the rebellion, one of which involved the Greeks requiring a sacrifice to their gods of a pig, and a local Jewish man who had assimilated volunteered to do it, at which point the patriarch of the Maccabees took out a dagger and killed him. His sons then killed all the Greek officials and their Jewish sympathizers. That's one of the stories of how it started. The other prominent story tells of one of the daughters of the Maccabees at her wedding getting up in front of the people and taking off all of her clothes. While everyone stood in shock, she said, "Oh, you're all so religious? You can't look at me this way, but the local Greek governor can?" And that night, she fed the would-be Greek rapist milk and cheese to get him drowsy. Then she pulled out a dagger and killed him, starting the rebellion. And that's why there's a custom of eating dairy on Hanukkah. Well, the rebellion that was sparked, however it was sparked, went much better than the Maccabees expected. They expected to lose very quickly, but they kept winning battles. And they eventually fought their way to the temple in Jerusalem, destroyed the statue of Zeus, and took the temple. They were determined to reestablish temple service, but the temple needed to be purified. Now, the purification laws were pretty lax, especially in that day, but the Maccabees recognized the hand of God in their victory, and they refused to cut any corners when it came to purifying the temple. And that required oil that was pure, which took 8 days to produce. As they looked through the temple, trying to find enough pure oil that would last until they could produce new oil, they found just one jar, which was enough for just 1 day. But they decided to use the oil at the rededication of the temple. And miraculously, that one jar of oil lasted 8 days until more oil was ready. And the next year, the high priest instituted the celebration of Hanukkah. Well, the thing that we as Christians should be inspired by in the story of Hanukkah is how this group of faithful people refused to bow to the pressure to compromise their faith and adopt cultural practices that went against that faith. And it encourages me because I see a lot of that same push by our society to have people of faith water down or set aside that faith in favor of the prevailing cultural views. And I don't mean things like saying happy holidays or Merry Christmas instead of Merry Christmas. I'm talking about society's ever-changing views on moral issues that Scripture directly addresses. Issues such as purity and marriage, protection of innocent life, and sex and gender. And then there's the temptation to just cut corners on moral issues generally. And the idea that as long as you believe the right thing or you participated in the right rituals such as baptism, it doesn't really matter how you live. The Maccabees stood up and said, we're not going to compromise our faith, even if it costs us our lives. Now, you and I aren't facing being killed with a sword if we stand up for our faith, but it may cost some our standing in certain circles. It might cost you your job if you refuse to go along. It might make life more difficult in the short term. But the spiritual courage of the Maccabees and the miracle God did as a result of keeping the light of the candles burning should inspire us to continue to be spiritual light as we look forward to celebrating the birth of the light of the world, the Messiah, Jesus Christ.